The Bear Roar Special Edition series, Bandwidth, serves as a platform to celebrate the people and stories of Dan's book, Bandwidth, the untold story of ambition, deception, and innovation that shaped the internet age and the dot-com boom. The story covers the epic journey of the creation of the internet backbones, the building of the early competitive fiber networks in the 1990s, the bandwidth boom, bust, and resurrection, ending in 2020 when Dan's company, Zayo, was sold. The book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Head to dan-caruso.com/book for more details. In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Hunter Newby, a visionary in the telecommunications and data center industries. From the early days of carrier hotels and meet-me rooms to the challenges of lease renewals and fiber contracts, Hunter shares insights from his time with Telex, ColoATL, and Neutrality. Dan and Hunter dive into the transformative impact of AI on networking, banking, and data centers, as well as the growing demand for power and connectivity in the increasing digital world. They also discuss the government's role in data center development, the military's influence on AI infrastructure, and the importance of local internet exchange points in shaping the future of connectivity. From lessons learned and partnerships to the unique opportunities in markets like Wichita, this conversation is a deep dive into the past, present, and future of interconnection. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Hunter Newby, how are you doing, buddy?
Good, Dan. How are you?
Good. So it's been a long time since you and I have caught up.
Yeah.
Now, after I sold Zayo, I haven't been going to the conferences or been on the circuit or even stayed within the industry. So I haven't really kept close tabs with all that many people other than people who are close to me here and in the Boulder or former colleagues. But bring me up to speed. What are you doing? What have you been doing these last couple of years?
Dan, still slugging it out in the industry like you used to do all the time. The industry's still here. It's growing. It's great to be in it. But like myself personally, after a couple of exits back in 2019 out of Neutrality and ColoATL, we sold that to American Tower. I sort of was ready to do nothing for a while. And then COVID happened and, I think everybody did nothing for a while.
Even people who had jobs did nothing for a while.
Right. And that's starting to get addressed a little bit. They're weeding some of that out. But it really, that time period, emphasized the need for networks. And I think it raised to the common everyday person how important networks are because everything went remote work, remote school, whatever. And then coming out of that, the emphasis on infrastructure investment, it only increased by 10x and then another 10x. I created my fund in 2017. I've made some directed investments out of there. I basically manage the investments that I've made at this point. I don't have a day job anywhere, but I'm on a board or two and I'm a partner in a lot of different things. But I'm still active in the industry because a lot of my investments are in the space. So one of the things that I started before COVID and then stuck with it through COVID and then after was Connected Nation Internet Exchange Points, which is a JV I have 50-50 with Connected Nation. So they're a nonprofit 501c3 out of Kentucky, been around 24 years, focused on rural broadband and closing the digital divide. And when I met them in 2018, they didn't know what a carrier hotel was. They'd never heard of a meet-me room. They didn't know what an internet exchange was. And I'm like, this is what's wrong with rural broadband, right? And they're great guys. So I spent a lot of time with them and educating them, brought them to New York, showed them 325 Hudson, which I was a partner at the time. And then we worked on a deal in Iowa together where they were hired by the governor of the state of Iowa to fix the broadband problem in an area which had an E-rate designation. I know you're familiar with E-rate, used to do that.
Sure.
I never did. As a carrier hotel landlord, I never actually participated in E-rate, but a lot of my tenants got E-rate funds and, I didn't care how they paid the rent on the first as long as it came in on the,
Yep.
This designation is called an AEA or Area Education Agency. And it's between Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, 65,000 kids, 15 districts. And short story, we helped show them how to buy transit correctly they were buying it from the school buildings themselves. So we had them aggregate it to a common address that we picked. And then we were able to reduce the cost of transit per meg by more than 90%, which was shocking. So then that led to the formation of a joint venture between us to solve the same problem, but own the land and the building, what I do, basically build meet-me rooms. Then we partnered with DKIX as the internet exchange operator, and we've diligenced the whole country based on an API I have into PeeringDB, which is all of my research, Newby Ventures site. There are 13 states in the United States without a single internet exchange in the state. And there are another 13 or so that only have one, and they're big states. So the country's pretty deficient in that respect in terms of latency. So we formed this entity based upon all this diligence. Cities of a population of 200,000 or more, no IX, more than 100 miles to the next IX, and then a rate per meg that the K-12s pay that's $2 or more per meg. So you combine all that and you sort of have this map appear. And that's just the beginning. And now with inference and generative AI and the need for low latency for that to even work, the hyperscalers are beginning to realize that latency matters, notwithstanding.
So what's interesting about what you're talking about right now is we're going to go through all the stuff you've been involved with, but you're describing kind of the formation of a current venture, years and years and years after we started building out internet infrastructure, and how there's still real-time opportunities to be creative, to think through how can we take this next level. But you mentioned toward the end of that, you mentioned AI. And right now, AI, as it has pertained to fiber networks, has mostly been a story about kind of fiber in the core backbones and data centers off the beaten path and their power supply. But something's going to happen with AI in a significant way toward the edge of the network. Tell me how you're envisioning AI to push out, and what's going to drive it to push out, and what that will mean for networking.
So absolutely spot on. And to address the first part of what you said, I think there's more to be done than has been done in terms of investment in network infrastructure. And by that, in terms of new development, what I mean is I bought a lot of existing carrier hotels, right? Like buildings that were already there that the fiber went to because fiber went there. So by default, since networks were there, networks already went. But those buildings weren't built to do what they did. They were built.
For the listeners, tell them what a carrier hotel is, and maybe a bit of the history behind carrier hotels.
Sure.
We began to touch on that, but give a quick tutorial of the importance of carrier hotels and the origin story of them.
Carrier hotels, a designation, the name of a building that wasn't decreed by the FCC or anything. It just sort of happened, where fiber networks went to connect initially to the incumbent. So the classic example is 60 Hudson to 32 Avenue of the Americas. 32 A of A in Manhattan on 6th Avenue is where the AT&T International Long Distance Switch, was in the 80s. And when MCI got started, McGowan, with the consent decree from the Supreme Court that opened up the international long distance business.
And Bill McGowan was I write this whole book about the fiber networks, and I'm not even sure I mentioned Bill's name in the book because I really didn't focus on MCI or Sprint. I focused on that next wave afterwards. But tell people who Bill McGowan is and how big of a pioneer he was for all of competitive communications.
He's the guy that broke the dam, and he's the guy that made it essentially 60 Hudson Street what it is. Because when McGowan used the consent decree, which is just a legal document that says that the AT&T Bell telephone system had to be broken up into 7 baby bells and their long distance business had to become deregulated, it was just a piece of paper. It wasn't physical. So McGowan, who started MCI, he wanted to connect his long distance switch to the AT&T switch. What's the first thing he did? He called AT&T and said, I need space in your building to put my switch in. And they said, no, there's nothing in the consent decree that says that we have to rent you space in our building. Go away. So he had to figure out in Manhattan with his limited budget how to put a switch in a different building and then get fiber, or at that time it was just coaxial cable, copper cable, to pull cable, trench the streets. Could you imagine digging up the streets in New York City? Like, McGowan did not have the concept of outside plant construction. He thought he was going to buy equipment, put it in a room in that building, and connect it to AT&T switch. What the consent decree failed to document is the fact that AT&T switch was inside AT&T's own building, carrier owned, not neutral. So the concept of neutrality, what was needed then, didn't exist because that was the alpha. So McGowan, studying the streets of Manhattan, trying to figure out the shortest distance, lowest cost of capital construction to get in, he discovered the old Western Union pneumatic tube clay ducts that had been in the ground that connected AT&T and Western Union since the 1920s. And AT&T is American Telephone and Telegraph. Most people don't remember that's the second T. And Western Union obviously was a big telegraph powerhouse. It was actually you would love this. It was a roll-up strategy funded by private equity to roll up the distressed telegraph assets west of the Hudson River and unionize them, which is where the name came.
Did not know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've been doing telecom M&A roll-up since the 1800s, Dan.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, true story. Western Union is epic. Mississippi Valley, they bought that. New Orleans Telegraph, they bought a bunch, and they patched it all together. And all those high gauge copper wires, all that long line stuff ran back to Manhattan. They had two prior buildings, one burned down, but 60 Hudson Street became their fortress in 1929-30, which also has its own interesting history. But regardless, McGowan found those clay ducts. He negotiated a deal with Western Union, who had at that time vacated the property, but they still retained the rights to the air in the duct. It was their network.
Yeah.
So they granted an easement to McGowan, and he was able to go negotiate a lease with 60 Hudson for space on the lowest floor possible, which cut down on the distance, the CapEx to build. And then he could pull his cables through those pneumatic tubes into the AT&T building, and had Justice Harold Green call AT&T's lawyers and say, McGowan will be in your basement on Monday morning. You have to connect his wires to your switch. And the lawyers went nuts. They were like, how did he get in the building? Like, we haven't given approval for, core drilling, building penetrations or whatever. So because MCI went to 60 Hudson, then Rochester Telephone went there because they did some numbers and they realized that they could build their own network down from Rochester to Manhattan to locate at 60 Hudson to connect directly to the AT&T long distance switch.
And Rochester Tel was not part of the Bell system. They weren't one of the baby Bells. They were their own independent. So they played by a different set of rules. So so they built all the way into 60 Hudson. They were the second in there.
They did the economic study to determine that the cost of the backhaul from drop and switched minutes in Rochester to get to Manhattan and on AT&T, they could build it themselves and it would pay itself back in a matter of time. And it did. So where did they go in Manhattan to get connected to AT&T? They went to 60 Hudson because the path had been established by McGowan. And now other networks did the same. And then over time, those networks within 60 Hudson became successful in their own right, and they needed to connect to each other. And then they started running all the crazy in-building cabling in the old pneumatic duct, clay duct system in the building itself. Eventually, they were full. They had to take an elevator shaft out of service to run cable. That's kind of a classic story. But to answer the question of the definition of a carrier hotel is that a building where networks went to originally connect to the Bell, usually across the street, whoever the Bell was, like an AT&T or whatever, incumbent. And then over time, they leased, suites and rooms and different floors, and then they needed to connect to each other. And that went on from like the CLEC days in the 80s and early 90s until the late 90s. And then that's when I found myself, in 60 Hudson Street with Telex. And we decided at the time we were in switch minutes. We were at 214 arbitraging origination and termination. But my biggest problem was how do I get connected to the other carriers on the different floors? Because I had to use local loops, like actual CLEC circuits to go between two floors in the same building. I thought that was ridiculous. And it took a long time and it cost a lot of money. So I convinced who we were the largest customer of at the time, Quest, which was originally LCI and became Quest. I convinced them to build their own conduit, pull fiber, and put a MUX in my room so I could directly connect to their DMS voice switch on the 20th floor, and we were on the 23rd floor. That was my first direct interconnect. I did that in 1998, 99. And then I had the epiphany that all the networks that were in 60 Hudson had the same problem. They all needed to get connected to each other, but there wasn't one single place in the building where they all were. So I said, why don't we become that? So we got out of the minutes business and we focused on solving the physical layer interconnection problems within a single building. And that's what Telex became. And then, of course, I focused on the subsea and got Deutsche Telekom.
And talk about the concept, which you already sort of had, but you didn't use the terminology. Talk about the concept meet me room.
Yeah. So what that concept was, the idea of everyone meets in a room. The term meet me room comes from the intended purpose. Whenever anybody...
Who came up with that term? Did you come up with that term?
People always say I did, but I don't know. I can say that I'm probably the biggest promoter of the term ever, but I don't know if I came up with that actual term. I think the guy that did the fourth floor at One Wilshire, put the moniker on it before me, but it is a moniker and it can be sold, as was proven at 60 Hudson Street when they just wrapped that moniker on a room and said, that's the meet me room, but no one was in it. Everyone was at Telex. But the meet me room in the old switch minutes business days, when everybody had their LCR, A to Z tables and they were trading minutes all over the world, I was one of those people. Everyone would talk the business terms of what rate to what country and call completion ratios and all this stuff, CDRs, whatever. And then those conversations would all end with meet me in 60 Hudson, or let's meet in, and name the carrier hotel. That was just an address. 60 Hudson's a 1 million square foot building. So it became, well, when you're both in the building, meet me in what room? And before the meet me room business of Telex, it was usually meet me in a room of another international wholesale switch like Star Telecom or Sirius, Viatel, even Global Crossing. There were different rooms where people would go because that carrier was, lenient in a sense that they would allow other people to put equipment in their room, but they were restrictive in a sense of letting them connect to each other. It was like, if you came into my room and took my space of power, you had to be buying something from me, bandwidth or minutes. Level 3 was classic for doing that. You could colo with them, but only if you bought all the network services from them. They didn't let you colo and connect to each other. So the meet me room concept, neutral meet me room concept, was born out of the necessity for all these networks to connect to each other directly without interference, without local loops, without any, discrimination of who are you and do you buy network services from me or not. It was purely a real estate business. And we started that formally. Telex Group Inc. was formed in the year 2000. And we were way ahead, like what years ahead of anybody else that thought of that idea and made it a business.
And you made it a big and valuable business as well. So tell the story of Telex, because Telex
the business propelled me to study the long haul fiber route maps of the U.S., a lot of which you built, and find the other 60 Hudson streets in different cities. And then my strategy was to acquire them. But if I called up as Hunter from Telex in New York, they would look at me as a competitor in a different city and they'd hang up. So I convinced a friend of mine who was a publisher of a magazine, industry magazine, to let me write a monthly article, a series called Meet Me In. Meet me in New York, meet me in LA, meet me in Chicago, meet me in Atlanta. And I used that as my way to call these owners of these buildings and or meet me rooms, because sometimes they weren't one and the same, to interview them. And I'd say I wanted to write a story about them. I'm a journalist. And then they would tell me everything. And I built relationships with them. They promoted their business. I even went so far as to help many of them design their meet me rooms, things that they hadn't thought of yet or whatever. And I told them, the only thing I ask in return is that the day you decide to sell the building, call me, because I'll pay you the most, because I understand what it is. And that worked for me many times. I've bought many of the carrier hotels that I've done, whether through Telex at 56 Marietta, which is the first one, almost 21 years ago now, May of 2004. And then several others that with neutrality. 1102 Grand was one. And, the buildings in St. Louis, 210 North Tucker, 900 Walnut, and many others. I had written articles about a lot of these buildings from that Meet Me series, which I started in 2003. I wrote it for 2 years, and then I did a follow-up on Ethernet and VoIP in those buildings in year 3, which is 2005. But anyways, yeah, that's how I got started. That's what I did.
And what ended up happening to Telex? How did that play out over time? I know I was at times interested in Telex. It was a little bit adjacent to what we were doing, but we bought FiberNet, as I'm sure you remember, which also had a Meet Me room infrastructure, primarily in New York as well, but a little bit in some other areas. And so the thought of bringing that together with Telex was of interest. But Telex always traded at really strong multiples. It was such a strong recurring revenue business. What happened to Telex?
Well, yeah, the FiberNet Meet Me room moniker business was interesting. You bought a business plan that was someone else's. You bought an empty room that actually used to be the Brown Derby restaurant at 60 Hudson Street, if you remember that. But yeah,
we did really well financially with that. That turned out to be a really lucrative investment because it returned cash, relative to the amount we.
The structure of the deal. Yeah, the structure of the deal was pretty good because the owner of 60 Hudson Street made it that way for himself. He's a good guy, smart, shrewd guy. But
yeah, he was the big winner of that.
Oh yeah, that he's done really well. So, Telex, the first sale was to GI Partners, and that was in October of 2006. And then by December of 2006, we had signed the master lease with Digital Realty to take over all their Meet Me rooms in the 10 buildings.
And when you sold it to GI Partners,
yeah,
were you still with them at that point, or had you moved on by that point?
No. I stayed through the exit. I joined the board. I was there for another 17 months. And then it was sold again after I left. When
GI Partners bought it, that was a really strong exit at the time, and then even stronger one after. So talk about what that exit looked like. That was
a $220 million deal-ish to GI, and then Abry bought it from GI for $750, and then Abry sold it to Digital Realty for $1.89 billion.
Wow! So some big winners there. So GI did well. The first exit was a really solid exit because I'm sure at the time that was whatever money you had in there, you probably paid it off. I don't know if you're seeing how much.
It was great. We started from zero, so it was a nice day.
Yeah. Did you feel like you guys might have left money on the table, seeing how it traded 2 times after that?
Dan, this video is not long enough for me to tell you. There's so much backstory.
That's what's nice about long form podcasts is you can go into backstories and share them. That's what people really learn from and like.
That's ancient history. Everybody has a different perspective. Success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. And a lot of people take credit for a lot of things because it all worked out. And I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to have been a part of it. It was a fantastic team. We all had a singular vision and mission. And I think the thing that really did it, 60 Hudson's amazing. The acquisition of 56 Marietta Street, like buying a Carrier hotel. One story I could tell you about that. Remember after the acquisition was announced, a lot of the carriers that are in Atlanta, the long haul guys, they're the same as our customers in New York. So they knew us already. And then there were a lot of Atlanta-based fiber networks like AGLN and others that didn't know us so much. But I spent a lot of time going down there and meeting with them. I actually got the prior owners of the building to host events at the building. And I was always good for events, right? So I wanted to bring customers together and educate them.
They were great events.
Good affinity, good educational, opportunities, customer relations and all that. And it always led to new deals. So the people in Atlanta kind of knew me already, but then they were like, wait, Telex from New York just bought the building. I don't get it. And a lot of people would say to me, well, Switch and Data and Equinix are already in the building. So how are you going to compete with them? Because they looked at me like a tenant at 60 Hudson. And I said to them, well, as long as they keep paying the rent on time, everything's going to be okay. And they would go, why do you care about them paying the rent? I said, because I'm the landlord. I bought the building. And they're like, but I don't get it. You're a colo. Why would you buy the building? I said, you don't understand. Control. It's all about control and the returns. I got this thing basically mortgage bank financed. How could I convince anybody to do this colo business on a leasehold? But if I was buying the building and the land and all the tenants and the NOI was basically what's going to collateralize the mortgage, then I could determine and dictate every square inch of the whole building, from the vaults to the roof to the generators to the UPSs, the power, the floor, everything. And that was a concept that no one had seen yet. There was real estate, and then there was colo, and then web hosting, which is now, the new euphemism is data center, and that's even gone to cloud, and that's now AI, and that's all higher layer stuff. I'm talking interconnection, right? So controlling points of entry into the building, controlling, the meet me room, controlling the power systems, so you can maximize efficiently and effectively scale each asset to its greatest potential. And that was the way that I managed, at least, the way I thought about the design of cable management to fiber panels to inventory management of ports, tagging every cross connect. We're the only ones that are allowed to do it. It's clean. And we have the inventory that we know what everybody has. At best, they're only going to know what they have. That was new. Nobody thought of that. Usually closets and manholes were rat's nests. Like they were just cables are just thrown all over the place. So the carriers like Zayo became, customers and appreciative of the fact that we took care of the physical facility. And then that concept, again, a colo tenant buys a whole building. Why? And then that launched, later in my career, the vision for neutrality.
So there must have been times, before we move on to later, there must have been times where the building owner, who controls the building, and you have a customer in that building who has an expiring lease, but they also have a gigantic investment in that building with a lot of dependency on kind of interconnects are taking place, in their space within that building. There must have been times where that created major opportunities for the landlord and major conflicts in trying to extract the value out of owning it, either stuff you may have been involved with or stories you may have been on the periphery of. What are some of your most memorable stories where the lease comes due, there's no renewal rights, yet there's a ton of investment in the building, and it's like, okay, it's time for renewal discussions?
Well, that still happens to this day. Not in some assets that I'm in, but ones that I'm familiar with. I'm not going to name names, but there is definitely conflict and perpendicularity, and it ends up in court because of what you just said. That's how valuable these buildings are. They cannot be moved. These are not data centers where servers come to end of life and people terminate or don't renew the lease and walk away, and you're left with a building. These buildings are the heart of all networks, including the internet. These networks can't leave, and they really have to be smarter about what they're trying to put in that building so they don't end up with a large footprint that they can't move, or an interdependency, like you said, on interconnection that's singularly unique to a market that if they were told that they had to leave, there's no way that they'd be able to extract themselves from there in any normal duration. It would take teams of people to do scheduling, hot cuts and rolls, provisioning to where? If there's a city with only one carrier hotel, where do you reconnect all those same networks in a different building in that city? You don't. So you'd have to buy metro fiber from someone else and tethering. So it's hugely problematic. My philosophy, the way I always treated my tenants, was very fair. We never charged monthly recurring cross-connect fees, not in any deal I've ever been in. I don't believe in them because I hated local loops. I was a carrier. I didn't like loops. If I'm going to get rid of a local loop and get other IXCs to move in my room, why would I tell them that they have to pay a monthly to connect to each other? That's the whole purpose. There was an arbitrage. They made so much money back not paying for the loops, they didn't mind paying me the rent. So that was my philosophy. And then when it came up to lease, renewals and stuff like that, more at the sort of, base rent, floor plate level, I never extorted anybody. I wasn't there to.
What landlord do you know has ever said they extorted one of their?
They're not going to say they extorted them, but we know a couple landlords, Dan, that have. Let me just say.
There's a guy up in Boston. He would always extort.
Oh boy, don't bring it up, please. Please don't bring it up.
What was his name again? He was with us, I think, at MFS or somewhere. We were in his, I was in his building when I, bought ICG when it was in distress, and they had a switch in that building. We were shutting down the switch, and, we were renegotiating deals with, everyone saying, well, you either renegotiate or we're not going to pay you. And then what are you going to do? And he's like, well, I don't care. He just waited us out. And I don't know if we ever renegotiated that one, but he might have been one of the very few who just said, I'm going to be collecting rent for you 10 years or not, for another 10 years, whether you use that facility or not.
So I'll give you a twist on the story. That's a beautiful one. I'm not going to name names because I can't on that particular deal specifically, but, and I'm familiar with pretty much all the carrier hotels in the U.S.
You have a lot of colorful deals. You got to be able to tell the colorful stories. You got to tell some of them.
Some of this is like trade secrets. You can't let the cat out of the bag, but I'm going to say this. It wasn't just the lease renewals. It was the consent rights, the assignment. So the consent to assign a lease by the landlord in a transaction back in the old, telecom bubble days where Chapter 11s, 22s, and 33s are happening monthly. There were a lot of tenants in one particular carrier hotel.
What's a 22 and what's a 33 for the listeners?
It's when you file Chapter 11 and then you file Chapter 11 again. Because
33 is when there's a third bankruptcy.
Yeah. The 33 is when you file again. Keep restructuring the debt till you finally normalize the balance sheet, which is like, could get it right the first time. So, the DIP lenders make out, but then the new senior secured don't because they get flushed again. But anyway, the consent right was a beautiful thing for the landlords that had it in the lease. If you want to assign the lease, you need the consent of the landlord. Fair enough. So this one particular landlord would hear about a transaction that's going to occur, and he would go to Europe to play golf for 3 months and just disappear and wait until he was the last thing they all needed. Because how the deals go, man. There's like 1,000 things that have to happen, and everybody's doing their checklists, and weeks go by until finally it's that last thing. Oh, that's right. We just need that one consent from that landlord to sign. And it's like, how big is this deal? It's $1 billion deal. Okay. For my consent, I want this much money. It's not written down anywhere, but like, I don't need to sign off on this. Like all that not to be unreasonably withheld and everything. Well, I'm on the slopes of Aspen or whatever. Yeah, the cell connection's really bad. I'll have to call you back. And how many lawyers do you have sitting there? Millions of dollars of lawyers every day. And they're like, we have to close this deal. And this guy, and I saw other people that learned from him, he would extract so much for that consent to assign the lease just to let the deal go through. It was unbelievable. It was art, and it was also extortion. It was terrible. But within the confines of, this is my land, these are my rules, my house, my rules. It was all legal. And I learned a lot from that. By the way, one of the reasons why I wanted to be the owner of the buildings is to protect my tenants from that. I never wanted to be that kind of person because I'm an industry person in the industry. I'm at Metro Connect. I'm working with the fiber companies. How am I supposed to be hanging out with you at some Metro Connect social or whatever? And you're like, yo, man, you're screwing me on this thing. Like, my whole feeling. And I'm like, have a drink, have a sandwich. It's fine. Don't worry. That's, it wasn't the reputation that I wanted. And it's helped me to not have that, because if I start a new venture, everyone's like, he's cool. We can work with him. He never screwed anybody.
Yeah. The fun part was, coming at it from a fiber angle, there were similar dynamics. And one of the biggest one is when we bought, AboveNet, the large deal between AboveNet and Verizon that was struck back in the, probably late 1990s, had a 20-year term and no renewal rights. So they had this spider web of fiber in dozens of cities. They didn't know which fibers they were using and not using. And it was one deal. It wasn't leasing a bunch of fiber. It was kind of all or nothing. So it became, when it came time for renewal, we had a ton of leverage. I don't know if we used our leverage to its fullness or not. Probably could have extracted a lot more, but it did come down to a bit of a game of chicken. We're like, well, look at all our other book of business. Like, great, but they're using our fiber. You can't. And we were quiet about it until we got within kind of a 6-month window, and then they start calling. Well, would take them 5 years to roll off of the fiber. And if we would have taken a position that, you don't have 5 years to use it, you're going to have to renew it for 20 more years. And it's, you're going to have to double down on the price. And, their argument was, well, we already paid for it. It's like, okay, well, I don't know what that means because you paid for rights to use it for 20 years. Where do you go next? And, that became a kind of a fun process itself. And you're always playing, like you said, you're in the industry, so you're trying to protect your reputation as well. You don't want to come across as being too, stubborn about it. But at the same time, like in any real estate transaction, you want to extract value as well.
Any reasonable uplift or commitment to expand space or bring more business to the facility was what I was looking for. Growth, positive, in favor of, not, I'm going to screw you for the same shit that you have right now. And you're not going to get anything more, but you're just going to pay more for it. That's a tough pill because, like you said, it would take them 5 years to roll off. And we all know that. They can't leave overnight. They can't even leave in 6 months. They can't even leave in a year. So you're going to have them for a really long time. Just consider holding the asset for a really long time and just refi and maximize. Now, some of these carrier hotels are maxed out, power wise or floor plan or whatever. But some aren't. And, you could still be creative about ways to, run cabling and build new facilities and things. And back to the original comment you made about AI and what inference and gen are going to do for fiber networks, particularly metro fiber networks, it's incredible. And I've already seen at the most macro scale, when we talk about an application that's going to drive it, banks, okay? And I don't mean investment banks. I'm talking about banks, lender bank, regular retail banks, they're using AI right now for fraud detection and fraud protection by, keeping the privacy of the customer, but interfacing with the AIs of all the other banks, sharing just enough information. It's like, are you seeing this here? Are you seeing that there? And then they triangulate it to isolate fraud and stop it. And they want to do that at the keystroke on the phone. In order to do that, they have to capture the keystroke in a sub 2 millisecond, which is somewhere between anything less than 150 miles, 150 to 50 miles, 3, 2, 1. The amount of money that these banks are saving by using NVIDIA, the Blackwells in particular, they can now do all their data processing from the day before in a fraction of the time it used to take them on like H100s, for example. And now they have, instead of 4 hours to make all their bets for the next day, now they have 20 hours. And they're making so much money off of that, selling financial products and hedging and insurance wraps to other banks. And this is all based on AI. So there's so much AI inference and between the banks themselves, private, like not on the internet, private AI interconnects, that a group of these banks have gotten together and they're now building their own submarine cable. That's how much they need fiber. They can't buy waves anymore. They stopped. They've been using spectrum for the past couple of years, but even that won't cut it. It's not about price. It's about how much capacity they need to turn up to keep up with the AI. Because it's the amount of data that's passing back and forth, not just internally within the bank, but between the banks, just for fraud detection. And there's an ROI in it for them to spend the capital to deploy their own. They can't outsource the AI. They can't give it to Google or Microsoft because it's the thinking. It's not like cloud where you could say, oh, this is protected in storage and whatever. It's the actual thinking. So because of FINRA and other things, they have to build their own AI. So they're going to build language models, but they're going to build these small distributed clusters that are capturing the keystrokes on a distributed basis to isolate and protect against, basically stop fraud. Fraud, of all kinds, bad checks or just transferring money or stealing or whatever. That's one application. Insurance companies and healthcare companies are going to do the same exact thing.
Who in the digital infrastructure world is going to be the big winners coming out of that?
Everybody that isn't over-levered, everybody that isn't betting on the utility to deliver them a gigawatt anytime in the next decade.
Do you think some of the companies who are raising the money and building out data centers are going to be caught with data centers that don't have the necessary access to gigawatts?
That's already happened.
Potential?
Dan, it's already occurred. That's old news. There are a lot of white elephants out there because PJM and ERCOT and others, they're so glacial in their cycles. They didn't catch up to themselves. PJM has a 58%, grid interconnect to usage ratio historically. That's published on their website. At least it was a month ago. And 58% breakage. So what does that mean? It means if you get a megawatt connection to the grid, on average, you only draw 580 kW. Well, guess what AI does? It draws 100% of the time. So they took all these, field studies and load letters and interconnect demand, and they papered all that stuff. And they just were like, oh, look, this is so great. We're doing our job. Until they realized that they had oversubscribed the grid, like dramatically oversubscribed the grid.
And it's just getting started. I mean, if they've already oversubscribed, I mean, this isn't something where capacity catches up to demand. I mean, there is fundamental challenges creating that power.
A bandwidth issue to drop a plug for your book. This isn't a bandwidth issue where you could just plop in fiber, put new lasers on it. This is a generation and distribution and transmission issue that takes like years for permits, approvals, polls, CapEx, who's going to pay for it, all that stuff. And the first canary in the coal mine of this problem was Dominion in Loudoun County, which is now a couple of years, at least 3 years ago. And it was a big miss. And people didn't really get the memo that when Dominion said, oh, oops, we forgot to tell you, we can't deliver any more power. And people were like, till when? And this is back in 22, I guess. They were like, 2026. So there were buildings that were built that they were done. They couldn't get power. So if you can't get the power, you can't get the cash flow. If you can't get the cash flow, you can't service your debt. You can't service your debt, you're going to get restructured. It's really simple.
Yep.
So bigger problems are here now with DeepSeek. But
yes.
As of yesterday, I haven't heard of any new problems, but supply chain, grid oversubscription, and then the hypers going with the DoD to the federal land deal, which is a whole different thing we could talk about, but that's codified. The executive order signed, the DoD and the DOE are going to license power to the hyperscalers at cost plus, not per kW. So I don't see any hyperscalers wanting to build those macro sites anymore connected to the grid. Why would they? Who wants to pay per kW? And then you got
tell us more about that deal, more about what the government's doing there.
There's an executive order that was signed 10 days before the inauguration that opens up federal land for data center development. It expedites permits and approvals and power. And there's nuance in it. You can read it, but it's there. Federal land doesn't necessarily mean that it's existing federal lands. It could be that a hyperscaler buys land, carves out a principality within it, like Vatican City kind of deal. And then that becomes federal land. And that's where this technology that's licensed to the DoD, that then they license it to the hyperscalers will go. It's a room within a room within a room, behind a fence, behind a fence, behind a fence. So think of it like Area 51 or like an ion collider, like Brookhaven National Labs or, Oak Ridge or whatever. And they had to do that, Dan, because the hyperscalers were signing contracts with data center providers who were no longer being able to perform. They couldn't deliver. And it was because the utility companies just said pencils down. And the hyperscalers are yelling at the data center providers going, we had dates and you got to deliver. And they're like, well, we can't make the utility companies do anything. And the utility companies are like, we don't have to do anything. And the hyperscalers went to the utility companies and said, hey, we said you have to do this. And they were like, we don't have to do anything. So we have to keep our jobs, basically. Yeah. So they went back to the DoD, because AI is a military operation. Let's face it.
Yeah.
And
the hyperscalers
go to the DoD and say, listen, we're in a capitalistic world. Everybody wants a return on invested capital, blah, blah, blah. That stands in the way of our ability to build AI for you. So you have to help us solve this problem. So they took them all to the White House in September, all of them. Okay. All the hypers are there. And when you go to the White House, it's not like going to Congress. You go to Congress when you're asking for permission. You go to the White House when you're telling people what you're going to do. And the DOD doesn't go to the White House and ask. They said, this is what's happening. And then they went away in September, and then comes December, here's the executive order. And you could see a lot of this already starting to manifest with like the Stargate project and some other things. AI is military. And if you think it's a business, you're missing the point. And if you thought you were going to make, huge returns on that scale, all right, let's bifurcate training model stuff, gigawatt stuff, and then the distributed edge stuff. I see the hyperscalers navigating towards the DoD and getting a license for power versus paying per kW. It won't be connected to the grid, so let's not worry about that. And then on the construction side, that's not going to be a data center provider, okay? That's going to be Bechtel. That's who's going to build it, okay? Or Halliburton or Skanska or somebody like that. You're not going to have data center providers in the same way that Google and all of them were buying transport lit capacity in the Atlantic, and then they just started building their own submarine cable. They hire Subcom to build the cable for them. They're not hiring a carrier to do it. So they're not going to hire a data center provider to sell them data center space and power. If they have to go get their own power from the DoD, then they're just going to hire a construction company. And that's how that's going to go. On the distributed edge side, yeah, data center providers are still going to do really well. But, what used to be considered a big data center is now an ILA. Like 10 megawatts is an ILA. That's kind of hard to believe, but it is. So if you take 3 or 4 of those and put them together, a 40 megawatt ILA campus is what we used to think a big data center was. And there will be magnitudes greater number of those on all the new fiber builds and all the new interconnection sites in the markets I'm going into and others that will largely make up for the fact that the navigation away from the industry for the 300, 400, 500 megawatt size sites, that's going to go federal because they can get it done with no NIMBY, no FERC, no NRC, no PUC. They got the DOD to cover for them. They're going to just say, DOD said it was okay, so go away, basically. And it's because it's military. I don't want anybody to get upset that, this sounds like nonsense or whatever. You got to take your brain out and say, okay, we're competing against China. They're authoritarian. They don't have any problems with capital, labor, materials, or anything, permits. And you think we're going to hold back and be slow? 10 years, we're going to wait. They're going to be ahead of us tomorrow. But we'll have to go through all these traps, and no, it's not going to be allowed. And that's just reality. That's coming clear if you know how to look at what's going on and pay attention to it. But again, carrier hotel meeting rooms cannot be decreed. They're not going to be built by Bechtel overnight. They're not single tenant sites. They certainly don't draw that much power, although they're starting to draw more.
Yeah.
But the incrementals, the Wichitas of the world, places where I'm going now, as a meet point only, will generate the need for many data centers that full of GPUs and NPUs and whatever's next, FGPAs and everything else, that have to hive off of those sites. And they all need to be built like at scale and mass at a record time, in order for everybody to like catch up, whether it's the bank applications or, any kind of inference or generative AI that, the virtual customer service, virtual attendant, your digital twin. You don't want that to be glitchy. You want that to be real time, and you want it to process and respond and do things. People are going to expect that to work on a phone in just a couple of years. How the hell is that going to happen without connectivity? Lots of glass, lots of interconnection, lots of exchange points, lots of GPUs or whatever in immersion or whatever.
And a lot more traffic on the mobile networks too. So let's talk about you want it to work on your phone, because I think that's something that's underappreciated right now is when you want AI to work on your phone. And like you said, you want it to work without glitches, without delays, kind of feel like it's happening in real time. Yet if it's AI driven, there's be a lot of processing that has to take place in a real time fashion, which means you don't have time to go to a data center that's remote somewhere. The the processing's got to be somewhere that's more local at the edge. And then there needs to be a lot of, capacity at the edge to distribute that such that it can get to your phone and feel like it's happening, in a blink of the eye.
Right. And I've stressed this to many people over and over again. Infrastructure at layer 0, 1, 2, 3. In order to do what you just described, you've got to have a local internet exchange switch at layer 2 that's run by credible people that provide support that are going to attract Fortune 500 companies. Okay. And that's a 24/7 knocked, SLA back office operation. That's a business in and of itself. DKIX is preeminent in the world in that. There are others that do it too, but they're really good. They've got a lot of amazing features and functions. That has to sit at the heart of a neutral interconnection facility, i.e. meet me room. Now, if I go tell governors of states and presidents of universities I built meet me rooms, they think I'm in the dating business. This is some kind of like OnlyFans thing or whatever. And so I just call it an internet exchange point because they all want the internet. Many governors don't want data centers anymore because the tax incentives and the water consumption and the power and the NIMBY, but they want the internet. They want it to work fast. They want their AI quick. So if you have that core and it's functioning properly and you have the right network present there, then those networks can all count on and rely upon their ability to generate data and have it routed locally for the lowest possible latency. So there's latency in the chips in your machines. Sure. There's gigahertz type latency, then there's gigabit type latency, then there's distance type latency, throughput. There's all these factors. But if you're just building data centers and you've got no local, not just physical meet point, but exchange meet point for IP, you're never going to get to the lower latencies that make all of this stuff work. And it's been a story that I've been trying to explain to people for a long time since, the earliest days of buying carrier hotels and building meet me rooms. Before internet exchanges were even popular in the US, they were advanced in Europe. They weren't here because of the size of the country, quite frankly. The United States is much bigger. But now it goes without saying, everyone's like, yeah, of course. But where they talk about getting connected to internet exchanges is always New York or Ashburn or Atlanta or Dallas or Chicago or San Francisco. There's a handful of cities that have big enough exchanges where sort of quote unquote everybody is. But that's hundreds of miles away from the inland, in some cases thousands. And when you think about fiber route miles, with slack and sag and sway and everything else, it's very degrading to performance. So there needs to be, and there is, which we're focused on, a very, directed, prescriptive approach to identifying the places without exchanges that need them and creating them with the consensus from the industry that it's necessary, it needs to be built, and that it could be done on a co-build basis where they get owner's economics on a unit basis, at a national level for a big commitment. And then all the local networks will come and connect because they're like the feeder fish. They come and connect to.
How does big tech participate in those? Are they part of the consortium that forms them?
Well, yeah. So for my initiative, big tech participating is a function of negotiating like a club cable, like a subsea cable. It's like a club meet me room deal, club IXP. Think of it like that. But they already participate in it in all of the known interconnection facilities.
Oh, sure. Of course they do. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not new. What's new is how do we create it from greenfield scratch in a market that we all agree has to be done, and in what order, and who comes first, and what do they need? Space, power, and who do they need to connect to? Because if we're going to sit around and wait for this to just organically happen like it did with the 60 Hudsons and the 1 Wilshires, it ain't never going to happen. It's not.
Yeah. And what happens will be by happenstance, which probably means suboptimal as opposed to something you could put thought and energy into. So,
100%.
We sort of been doing this, but just to connect the dots, take us through when you left Telex. Take us through your journey from post Telex to now. What were you involved with, and how has that kind of led to what you're doing now?
So one of the things I really thought about deeply, while at Telex, prior to the event occurring, was the strategic and vulnerable nature of Telex itself in terms of North Atlantic subsea. So, we were successful in bringing in, at the time, the 7 main North Atlantic submarine cables into Telex, whether directly like TAP 14 or through a fiber demarcation extension, which became like the main interconnection point for that system. So we had Tycho, we had Apollo, we had Hibernia, Flag, I'm missing one. No. Yeah, that was it. Well, whatever. Close enough. So they were all there in the room. And when a system would go down, which they were all built not to, but they always did. And when a system would go down, we would get like a flurry of calls where it was like, oh my God, move all these patches from this panel to that panel. And it was to restore the North Atlantic because a cable went down. And before we created Telex, that wasn't possible. We could restore the whole North Atlantic, and we did several times in a matter of a few hours, when they used to go down for like, weeks. And it was a maintenance, a corkscrew, a shark thing, an anchor, whatever, all the above. So I began to realize how important and strategically vulnerable it was that all the cables land on Long Island and New Jersey and backhaul all into 60 Hudsons, all the bridges, all the manholes, all the tunnels, all the points of failure to get to one floor in one building where they all had fiber presence so that all the buyers of capacity on those systems could mix and match in the event of a problem. We were the only place on the whole eastern seaboard of the United States. So I was like, oh man, well, now that we got everybody in here, all the submarine cables in here, we got to get them out, not make them leave, but create another point. So I had this idea to build mid-span submarine specific cable interconnection points. And that's where the genesis of what was originally called LIDAR and then 1025 Connect, and it's now NYI at 1025 Old Country Road. So I got, I knew AC1 and MaxSAC and Yellow. So you remember Level 3 Global Crossing, their submarine systems. Those are the ones that I forgot. And MaxSAC. So that was when Jim Poor was still at Global Crossing, and I told him, and he was like, you're absolutely right. This is terrible. So he did a breakout from his Shirley, New York landing in Westbury into this facility I started. And then because of that, I accumulated many other systems and all the metro fiber here and on the island and everything else. And that same idea I shared with Gil Santalese, and that was the genesis of NJFX, which I'm still a partner in today. So those are two things that the one I started and the other idea came later. NJFX, we built 2015. So I'd already been out of Telex for a bunch of years by then, but I knew Long Island and New Jersey needed their own neutral cable landing interconnect points. NJFX is actually a CLS.
And did you partner with Gil to launch that? What was the genesis?
Yes. Yeah, I'm an equity partner.
Gil's a great guy. I've gotten to know him a bit over the years. He's still running that to this day. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I'm an equity partner in the deal with Gil. We basically started that together. He's the CEO. He runs it. I help him whenever he needs help, negotiating some language or some idea or a positioning or a contact or a meeting or whatever. I show up to the annual members meetings in New Jersey and Spring Lake. It's always fun. It's a great facility. It's a great team. He's a great CEO, been a great partner, has executed on everything we talked about. And it became the model. 1025 is just a building. It used to be like a car dealership. We purpose built the Tycho submarine landing station, took the plans for Tycho 2 that they never built. And it was Tata at the time when we acquired the land, and we built that station. And we also negotiated for the rights to the beach manholes and all the bore pipes and the ducts to the ocean. It was so unique, Dan, when we did that. Nobody had thought of doing anything like that. The next closest things are like Interaction in Marseille, which Digital bought, and a couple others. But now it's a proactive thing, Equinix in Lisbon and some others. There are other places in the world that, and I've long sought, like acquiring landing stations, doing development and whatever, just like NJFX. And now DC Blocks, that's the other one in Myrtle Beach. Purpose-built neutral cable landing stations. Mm-hmm. So we started that with NJFX, and that came from my concern that anything would happen to the 4 manholes around 60 Hudson Street that would take out all communication between Europe and Latin America and the US. That would be a problem. So there, those two things that I was doing. And And then, after that, when I exited Telex, I started Allied Fiber, negotiated a 25-year right-of-way agreement with Norfolk Southern Railroad, acquired a bunch of duct that they had, then did a deal with Florida East Coast Railroad, and built, buying fiber from Corning, built a short haul and long haul, a 528 and a 216, from Miami all the way to Atlanta. So from
and
the
528 and 216 is fiber count.
528 and 216 ribbon. You're right, Dan. I'm talking to you. I know I don't have to say that. Yeah.
Most people that are from the industry, but we make sure they're following along.
That was interesting, the design of that, because I wanted to think up a way to build distributed neutral meet me rooms around the whole United States. So in 2008, my vision was to build a new dark fiber system that linked the submarine cable landing regions of the U.S. So that was 2008. And my design was for modular constructed ILAs, which was also, multiple modules, which doubled as not just an ILA in a regen, it was a meet me room.
Yeah.
And we built 11 of them. I designed and built them with Mike Rourke. We put the fiber in.
What happened to that? What happened to Allied Fiber?
Well, I exited that deal around 2016. That's a whole nother story of my life, with my private equity / family office investors, some really good friends of mine, and one of their friends who became our senior lender. And ultimately, the lender wanted to own the assets. So it was an interesting story, how that, I wouldn't even call it a transaction, how that whole situation transpired. I remember when we finished the build, actually, from Miami, and we announced it to Atlanta, and you called me and you said, "Hey, Hunter, let's make a deal." I should have done that deal.
Yeah.
But it's in the hands of two different entities now. One in Florida is called Southreach Networks. Mike Severance, the CEO. Mike's a good guy. Yeah. And that's, I think, they might be exploring a process right now. But anyways, the idea with the handholds every 3,000 to 5,000 feet, depending, FECR was 3,000 and Norfolk Southern was 5,000 north of Jacksonville. And then the buildings every 60 miles. It was for laterals to be built in from the metro fiber providers for fiber to the tower, fiber to the town, fiber to the PSAP, whatever, universities, the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium. And they all built laterals in, and then we would splice them in to our short haul ribbons to get to the regens. And then they would take a rack like a colo business and cross connect all the networks. But at the other side, we sold 20-year IRUs to America Mobile and to PCCS and Cable Bahamas and Windstream. So we had both. We had national long haul. We had regional short haul, municipal fiber networks, and the lot. And they all met in these meet me rooms every 60 miles. So it was ahead of its time. Great vision. Everybody still asks me about it. It's still running. The assets are rock solid. It was the capital structure. So I learned a lot about what not to do and who not to partner with coming out of that deal. And then during that time, I was approached by Jerry Marshall of Amerimar, and he really wanted to buy a carrier hotel with me. And a lot of people would
tell us more who Jerry Marshall is.
Jerry Marshall is chairman and CEO of Amerimar Enterprises, which is a real estate property developer, owner, operator. And he and I met in Philly years back when I was at Telex. Guy that worked for him, knows I'm from Philly originally. So he was like, come down. I want you to meet my boss. I'll buy you a cheesesteak. So I was like, I'll take the train. I'll visit my city. I'll have a cheesesteak. And we were at Jerry's building at the time at 1500 Spring Garden. I graduated from Drexel University. So that's just up the street, basically. I know the neighborhood. So Jerry was like, I want this building to be a carrier hotel. So I'm eating my cheesesteak and I said, Jerry, look out the window. I said, you see that building across the street? He says, yeah. I go, that's 401 North Broad. That's the carrier hotel. This may be a data center. Maybe. That's a carrier hotel. He says, tell me why. I want to know why. So, he was relentless and God bless him. He's great. So one day he sent me a book on 325 Hudson. And he had sent me a lot of teasers, and I just would reply, no, and then he sent me this one, and I go, this will work. And I swear, wherever I was, I could hear him screaming, why? And like he wanted to know why that one would work and the rest wouldn't. And I said, because I know Flag is in the building from back in the old days. He's like, what's that? I go, that's a transatlantic submarine cable system, and both north and south routes that go to London and Paris touch in that building. It's 111 60 Hudson at 325. I said, I need to see it, but if I see what I think is there, then it'll work. So we met in New York. We toured the building. I saw what I thought I was going to see. I actually saw more. It was the prior owners, Bristol Group and Young Woo did a really good job building out the internal infrastructure. But they lacked one thing. They lacked POEs, points of entry, core drills, to ECS, the manholes and the conduit system that carries all the fiber in Manhattan. There was giant, like multi 3-foot thick concrete foundation, keeping them from getting all that fiber in there. Just landlords don't think like that. So me and Jerry went on the hunt for equity, and we partnered with Jamestown, and we ended up buying that building in amazing, like in 4 weeks, we raised 110 million and bought 325 houses. And then we went about building the meeting room on the 9th floor and moving networks and everyone in there. So that was happening 2012. And then that was the beginning of the year. I think we closed in April. And then Jerry was like, after I'd sat down to explain to him how a carrier hotel and a meeting room works in a spreadsheet, he was like, let's buy more. He goes, do you know any other carrier hotels? I said, sure. I pretty much know them all. He says, well, if you could buy one more, like what would the next one be? I said, I'd buy 1102 Grand in Kansas City. He goes, let's do it. And well, long story short, we did. We closed on 1102 Grand, just me and Jerry basically. And we partnered with Angelo Gordon at the time, which is more of a real estate private equity firm. They were very happy.
And that's in what year was that roughly?
2012. That was October.
Oh, that's a while back still. Gotcha.
Yeah. And then, I mean, my timeline and all these things, there's a lot of different deals I'm in. So I started things and then we started buying buildings. So a lot of this starts to overlap. Yep. I became a partner in ColoATL, I think right around that same time, 2012. I'd have to check. So Tim Kaiser owned ColoATL. That was in 55 Marietta in Atlanta. And Zayo was a big customer of ours, actually. Yep. That was Zayo's main pop was with us. It was really cool. Tim was my building.
Was that because of AGL, or was that because of BubNet's network? Or how?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was probably BubNet. Yeah. Well, it could have been both. It could have been both.
Yeah.
Because you made both acquisitions there. I love Atlanta. Atlanta is one of my favorite cities from a lot of perspectives, but my carrier hotel
in Atlanta.
Oh yeah, man. It's the cotter pin that holds Europe and Latin America together before all the submarine cables. But right there at Marietta and Forsyth, the most dense fiber junctions in pretty much anywhere. Going out to Dallas, going up to New York, down to Miami. It was incredible. So anyway.
Well, tell us the origin story of that deal.
So Tim was the building, and Tim Kaiser is a very unique person. He's a Georgia Tech electrical engineer. He was in the Air Force. He was a B-52 bomber pilot in Desert Storm. He's one of the most brilliant electrical engineers I've ever encountered. He could look at a power panel. He could look at all the breakers and he knew which one was wired wrong just by looking at it. I saw him do it many times. Crazy. He knew it was wired backwards just by looking at it. Like, how can you tell the red and the black wires? He just scanned it. He's like, that one. I'm like, wow. So, he was a building engineer at 56. And then he started a small little, by himself, 1,000 square foot leased colo at 55. And he did a deal with me and Todd Raymond at Telex when we owned 56 to run diverse 432 count fiber cables between the two. Like he wanted to be in 56, but we structured it as a partnership, which is interesting. And I was intimately involved in the creation of that, which then came back years later in a separate deal, very useful that I remembered the origins. And so years later, I exited Telex and whatever and did Allied and started buying buildings with Jerry. We hadn't formed Neutrality yet. We formed Neutrality in 14, I think, when we bought 401 North Broad, which is a follow-on to that other story. But Tim reached out to me and he said he needed help growing his business. He'd gotten it to a certain point, couple million in EBITDA, and he was like, I need to go to the next level, but I'm an engineer and you're out there in the industry and everybody knows you and whatever. Can you help me? I said, sure. I went down to Atlanta, I met with him, and we made a deal, and I became partners with him in the business. And then we basically just did all the things that he hadn't been doing. We designed the facility differently. We built a real proper meet area with glass panels and all the patch panels with all the names, and we did cable management completely differently. He had a way to do interconnection, not my way. I said, no, you got to present it. It's got to look good. You got to show people who's here when they come in. It's clean. It's perfect. All the cables have to be laced, every rung with, wax string and all this stuff. And he did it. And we expanded the business. We added a lot of customers. Akamai was a big tenant, yourselves and all the big fiber networks there, Southern, and I mean, so many. So we grew the business from 2 to 5. One of the first things I did was bring Tim to Metro Connect. That was when it was at the Fontainebleau in Miami.
Yeah. When did they go in the Fontainebleau?
Oh no, they can't. It's too big, and they got priced out $1,000 a night rooms and stuff. They're in Fort Lauderdale now. So anyway,
how is it at Fort Lauderdale? We'll come back to certain segment. How is Metro Connect at Fort Lauderdale? Is it what's the atmosphere like? So
it's okay. It's like PTC in Florida.
Oh, so it's lost that. Has it lost the coziness of what?
No. PTC is even more cozy than Metro used to be. Remember, we used to wear suits and stuff. Like nobody even does that really anymore. They're not wearing Hawaiian shirts, but everybody's casual-ish sort of now.
Okay.
And it's not Miami, it's Fort Lauderdale. Look, pros and cons. We all love Miami. Okay. South Beach, Collins Avenue, loved it. But now they've taken over the whole hotel. This Marriott, whatever it's called, beachfront or harborside or whatever. This is the 3rd year, I think, or 4th. They've taken over the whole hotel, all the venues, all the restaurants, all the meeting rooms and everything. So, it's our place. Like we just go inhabit it, for almost a week. And, it's very busy, obviously, it's what you make of it, right? So you could set up your meetings or you could just go there and see people, or do both. And you could pack, back to back to back, or you could leave space. And, you hear about everything that's going on, and everybody's there in mostly the capital PE, lender, banker world. And then all the fun guys and the data center people and so on. But anyway.
My favorite event of the year was Metro Connect in South Beach. That PTC to me are the best. But I brought Tim we hosted a dinner with Bank Street. I introduced him to them. I said, these are going to be your bankers. We're going to hire, Kamal Hawa at Greenberg Traurig. And that's the recipe for success. And boy, was it. And years later, in 2019, we ran the process and we exited to American Tower. And it was a great deal. And it was American Tower's first deal in the space, and really the first original publicly traded tower company that bought a standalone colo business. And I have, many people to thank in that, Jake and John Giardelli at American Tower, especially, at Bank Street and Kamal and Tim, number one, first and foremost. He did the job of 15 people. So that was ColoATL. Anyway, and Metro Connect is beautiful because you can plan your whole year around it. All the deals you're in, you bring them there. It's like the debutante ball. We're going to run a process, and then you run it. And, Well, Metro Connect comes up at in my book Bandwidth, and a couple of really important points. I mean, that's when when I presented the deal to Bill LaPerch.
I was in the front row, Dan. I don't know if there's any pictures of that. I saw you put your wallet on the table.
That's in the book. That's still something people talk about.
I was right there. I usually didn't go to those things, but if you were giving a keynote, I was going to listen, and that was great.
Yeah, and it was all spontaneous. I don't know if you remember the context, but and then Bill and I were able to talk about it, as part of the preparation of the book, and he reminded me of some details that I had forgotten about that I was able to incorporate in the story. But it was John from FiberTech, John Purcell, who they were getting ready to launch a process, but they hadn't declared it yet, and he must have done a lot of digging with his bankers about Zayo's situation. So they came to the conclusion we were out of money. So he starts the big talk with, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if Dan gave us all that money like he's giving everyone else, but Dan doesn't have any money. So, we're not really sure what we're going to do and this and that. But I had struck a deal right before MetroConnect with GTCR to back us and go on a hunting license. And above that was our target, our primary target. So while he's talking and downplaying our ability to do anything else, I'm just sitting there. So I reach in my pocket, pull out the wallet, and then the next day is when we present an offer to Bill, and just in time because they were getting really close to taking the company private. But MetroConnect was also the key spot in which when we were selling Zayo, and we were kind of in a tough position because we only had one bidder, and they were trying to lock everyone up, and then they were trying to use the fact that we had no other bidder to drive the price down, and I needed Mark Gonzi and I needed EQT to team up together. So I used MetroConnect because I wanted to be really visible to the others that I was talking to them to get them interested, and that's how they came together to actually do the deal. So MetroConnect was kind of, the hotbed for, deal making in those days. It sounds like it still is.
It still is. I mean, the hyperscalers and the data center side, and even on the fiber side, they're calling shots because they have the liquidity, whatever you want to call it. They have the cash, they have the money. And, the Lumen deal that Microsoft and Meta did and that kind of stuff, I don't know that that's happening at Metro. Like you were like the pinnacle of M&A, rainmaking at the event of the year that was for that. And it was like every year it was the cycle, and you were the keynote and everybody came to listen, like, what's Dan going to say? Give us the vision. And now that's Mark, really. Like, Mark's taken over that role. And he's great too, Mark Gonzi, for the people that don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And it's still that, for sure. It's unique. I think a lot of us, sort of remember what it used to be like when it first started.
Yeah.
And it evolved because capital found us, they found this industry. And they said, wow, this is really amazing. It's sticky, high margin, recurring credit tenants or whatever, customers. And it's important.
And lots of transactions. So the bankers loved it too.
The bankers love it. And now they sponsor everything. And, and I've always fought, as much as I love everybody in the finance world, and I have a lot of friends there, I've always fought to have the industry have its own time. And I used to do the stuff on the boats and everything, and, trying to do things in different rooms and create a day, infrastructure day to keep if your owners and, and the bankers are in the room, you're not going to tell people that it's not always sunny outside. You're not going to tell the truth about we have problems. But that's the way it used to be. When Dave Rusin used to come, back in the day, we would talk about stuff openly, things that didn't work, like different varieties of Ethernet that didn't interoperate, or fiber core mismatches or whatever. And everyone in the audience would be like, if you had this problem, somebody said, yeah, this is how we dealt with it. And everyone would be like, oh, take notes. That all went away when the money came. And then also they would pull people out of the room like you and go have private meetings when the sessions are happening. So then the attendance went down in the sessions a lot. And that's, deflating. Like they would come and see you for the keynote. You'd walk out and 100 people would follow you. And it was like,
the good old days.
Just have to mention you next, But we still do things.
Those
we're doing the meetup.
Were crazy, like the bar atmosphere, the around the pool, that's where a lot of the interesting discussions would take place. So let's go on to your venture that we went through the Atlanta. Take us to the next venture.
Well, I guess it was just neutrality. We bought several more carrier hotels. We traded.
And who was the we behind that? Who were your partners?
Myself, and Jerry Marshall at Amerimar partnered to buy 325 Hudson and 1102 Grand, and then with the acquisition of 401 North Broad, the neutrality REIT was officially created. Actually, my oldest son came up with the name neutrality, and my son called it. Yeah. And then me and Jerry sold 1102 Grand to ourselves into the REIT. So we exited with Angelo Gordon and sold it into what was then Abrams Capital back neutrality. And then we bought several more buildings. We bought 210 North Tucker, 900 Walnut in St. Louis, 717 South Wells in Chicago, 1301 Fannin in Houston. Yeah, and that was all of them. 325 Hudson, though, was Jamestown. That was never part of neutrality. That was always outside of neutrality. And long story short, design, build meeting rooms, call the networks, make them come in, everybody's like happy, whatever. I spent a good deal of time at 1102 Grand, working with KCP&L, KCADC, the local groups, power groups, the economic development people, the networks, some time in St. Louis, definitely time in Philly. And then eventually Macquarie came along and I exited to them, and Abrams exited at the same time. That was in 2019. That was in August of 19. And then, like I said, that and ColoATL happened in the same year. Both of those transactions. And then COVID happened. So it's kind of like nuclear winter in deals and stuff. But I was working on Connected Nation Internet exchange points already. So I'd started that sort of in 18, and then it went through the COVID uncertainty, but then networks became really important. So then coming out of it, we formed the JV, and long story short, we've secured a deal in Wichita with ground lease with Wichita State University for 40 years for $1. And the state of Kansas has awarded us a $5 million grant to build this building. It's a modular colo short story with manholes and, racks and whatever. And DKIX will be the internet exchange in it. So we're the landlord to DKIX basically. And then we've got all these fiber networks in the state, KFN and Zayo's there, Cox Communications, the school itself. And if you didn't know about Wichita, you should. It's actually quite amazing. And I didn't know, but Wichita is an industry town. It is the aviation and aerospace engineering capital of the United States. And if you go to WSU's campus, you'll see the broader campus. Part of it's called Innovation Campus. And on Innovation Campus is the North American headquarters for Airbus and Dassault and Textron and a whole bunch of companies. And Textron owns Beechcraft and Cessna, and you got Learjet and Bell Helicopter, and you got SpaceX across the street and McConnell Air Force Base. And there's just so much going on there. And Deloitte has the Smart Factory on the campus, which is really cool. And the internet is 382 miles away, which makes no sense. So we're fixing that. And that's sort of our alpha. We have dialogue with, the major network operators in the US and the big, cloud content guys. And, it doesn't take much to make a little site like that make money. And of course, since it's grant funded, we're going to be a cash flow positive, break even, EBITDA positive, immediately. As soon as networks just move in.
We bought a company that was primarily dark fiber and 100% Wichita, great network. And I would always use Wichita was one of the 5 or 6 examples I would give when we were at Zayo and, the discussions about how do we really extract as much value as possible from the assets that we had accumulated. Because when you think about it, you were just talking about Wichita is its own very unique market. And if all you're doing with that market is selling into it from remote, like if you have your Boeing sales team trying to sell into that market, and your, the other companies you mentioned, many of which are headquartered elsewhere, you've got a salesperson somewhere else and they're selling and maybe they hit that market. You also need to pursue that market from the ground up. You need someone there who is kind of a biz dev type person that understood exactly where our network is, exactly where, the meet me room type facilities, colo facilities, who had data centers, and someone who was kind of working that from the ground up, matching it up with your fiber network. And it was always hard because, what's the role of the geographic person who is kind of a salesperson, but maybe not because they weren't really on the same kind of quota. And it really wasn't around selling to small businesses because these are big businesses that need your fiber, but most of them are big businesses where the decision makers probably aren't in that market for what we sell. They're probably somewhere else. But if you weren't really looking at it as an ecosystem, you were going to miss out on 2/3 of the opportunities. And, we would try to get that right. When the new owners bought Zayo, that just went, right over their head. They couldn't get their head around that. And, so we set up these geographic regions, 5 regions in the country. Then each region would try to break themselves into kind of the geographies and be kind of an overlay organization that would work the assets from the ground up. And we could never quite get as dialed in as I wanted to. We were getting there, but it was hard because it was unnatural. So let's shift the discussion. And you are who you are now. You've been in this industry, a long time. You tried a lot of things. Some of them worked really well. You tried things that didn't work as well. And then, like me, you got to see this industry go through all these crazy cycles. In the category of, if you knew then what you knew now, what do you think of? What do you think of in terms of, what you would have done more of? When would you have done more of it? How would you have done differently? And with the benefit of hindsight, what's really important as you look backwards in time, kind of reflect on your, yourself, your career journey, kind of your, the whole craziness that we all have been through together.
Well, I've been asked this question a few times in different settings and panels and whatnot. And I guess if I had to just sum it down to one thing.
Yeah, but this is just between me and you. No one, you can get a little deeper right now.
Choose your partners wisely. So think about who you're getting into business with, what their motivations are, okay, what their stresses are, pressures, return expectations, the whole 9 yards. And, don't get all excited just because you closed on raising money. That's when the work starts. And knowing that everything always costs longer, costs more, it takes longer, costs more, it takes longer, everything. So who are your partners and how are they going to react when that happens? It's not that the vision's wrong or the plan's wrong. It's that it takes more time, and time costs money. And who's going to fund that? So calibrating all of that and tempering enthusiasm and expectations, setting the right expectations, I guess, beyond picking the right partners, is setting the right expectations. You have to have those two things synthesized. And I've seen problems, and I'm a problem solver. I'm sort of compelled to solve problems. I don't know. I like big problems. I like network problems. I like trying to figure out how to solve them. And this country has a massive network problem. It's a patchwork quilt of disparate things that all have different ownership, age, capital structures, debt service, all sorts of stuff. How do you refresh fiber like Sprint? You don't. Dave Schaefer, you buy it and you turn it off. And I was saying that years ago, and I realized that just because it makes networking sense doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It doesn't mean that anybody wants to do it because they're making money a certain way today and they don't want it to change, even though they should invest in diversity or invest in upgrades or whatever. They have to return capital and they're going to squeeze. And, deferred maintenance and everything else is kind of just like table stakes for these people. I'm talking about a real vision to deploy capital, to build infrastructure, to get ahead of what we're faced with now. What we're faced with now in terms of the need for distributed interconnection on a neutral basis is not new. I've been talking about it and actively pursuing solving the issue since 2008. And the issue persists. And if you look at Connected Nation, my partner in the CNIXP deal, they've been around for 24 years trying to solve the rural broadband digital divide, which all comes down to fiber, interconnect, local meet points. The 24 years they've been at this. So it's still a problem. And I intend to actually have a meaningful impact on resolving it in Wichita and places like that. Like you said, where's the ecosystem? The fact that it never gelled is because there isn't a single neutral meet point in Wichita. And there's a lot of cities that don't have one. And I know them, I've identified them, and we're building a plan. But like, how do you do it? Pick the right partners, set the right expectations. If you're going to bring in outside capital, make sure you have control. Don't ever give up control. Have your ways to restructure it. Because otherwise you're taking your idea, your hopes and your dreams, and you're hitching your horse to somebody else's wagon. And if it's one deal in a fund and they're going to starve certain ones of capital because they want to focus on others that are outperforming and yours happens to be, the one that gets starved, it's sort of like, sorry, fund level decision, that's the way it goes. And, if you live, with passion for what you do, you don't want to see, your baby, starve or suffer. So I think about that a lot now. Like I choose the deals I want to be in and who I want to be partnered with. I don't have to do things that I don't want to do.
What keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? Why are you still running hard?
Because the problem still exists, Dan. And I've thought about punching out a couple times on this. I've got other investments in blockchain and stuff that are doing really well. And it's taken me into new areas. Actually, my first directed investment was into a blockchain business, and that's turned into 3 or 4 other things that's doing phenomenally well. And I'd like to spend more time doing that. But just like you, the institutional knowledge that we have about how things work and all the people and everything, if I stepped away, I don't know who's going to fill that void. And that kind of keeps me in it because I like to teach. I like to explain. I love the business and the people that are in it. And we've had so many great times and so much fun together. I don't care if it's subsea or metro or long haul or carrier hotels or meeting room, all of it. It's all great.
Yeah. I did step up.
I want to stay in it.
Yeah. Yeah. When I sold Zayo, I intentionally stepped out because I've been in it so long and I wanted to explore other aspects of kind of technology and businesses and kind of not feel like I was trying to, recreate something because I felt like, I kind of hit a certain level and anything I would do after that was most likely to be, a step down. And I didn't want to go do something that, was a 10-year type of, highly ambitious projects. But what's helped me is in writing the book Bandwidth and doing these podcasts is be able to reflect on kind of my journey, the relationships I had over those years, cringe at things that I wish would have happened differently and, maybe celebrate things that worked out. But, appreciate kind of the whole journey. And then especially the people that, that were, alongside me or even rivals, but respected rivals along the way. And it's been great to do that. We need a sequel that has to do with meeting rooms and co-location facilities. So maybe you could be the
writing
sequel
already. Dan,
all right.
I've been asked this question. I'm so happy you're writing this book. I bought it already. I'm waiting for it. But I've been asked the question, how come I never wrote a book or why don't I write a book? And my answer was always, I'm still doing it. Yeah. I always thought about writing a book like after I'm done, like, your memoirs or something. And I realized something with AI. We've reached an inflection point now where I need to stop and look back at everything. And thankfully, I wrote articles about what I was doing while I was doing it. Yeah. So I have all of that to put into the structure of this. But what was cool is I'm partners in a deal with a guy who's president of a digital marketing SEO company, and he's just a wizard. And he built a GPT for me that he dumped all of this into, and now it's interviewing me for the book, which is awesome. Cool. So, cool. Yeah, and it's an interesting book. It's sort of like, it's like a history book and a textbook and a picture book and stories and all the stuff we just talked about and more. And I just want to share all of that. And my research site, like if you go to Newby Ventures and the research, I have an API into PeeringDB. For people that don't know what that is, that's a database online user contributed content of all the internet exchanges and internet exchange points and AS networks, autonomous system networks, which is basically the number address for all the like Google's, Microsoft's, and all them. Yeah. It's a resource. So I have this
level 3 end up with AS1.
Yeah, AS1. I have this API into that. I've extracted the data. It's updated daily. So I have a real-time updated map of the world of where internet exchanges are and therefore where they're not. And that informs me on where to invest with my Connected Nation venture, for example. And I want to attract attention to that because the world's a big place. I mean, I'm being asked to do stuff in Africa and Latin America. And, you know, how can I help? It can't be on planes that much. So the vision of the book is to be both history and then a segue from the old paper world to the new online digital, and then, you know, daily updates of every single exchange in the world, adding networks and adding nodes and what is the new address in this city and which exchange is bigger than which in which building in which city. Real time, you know, people can go to that and use that. So, yeah, it's actually very important. And you know, why am I still doing it? Because I want to transfer all this knowledge and bequeath it to everyone. And then, I don't know, you know, be in my blockchain deals or whatever. I agree with you. I wanted to diversify and I did. And now I'm in 6 different deals that aren't related to colo and carrier hotels and meet me rooms and all that stuff. And they're dynamic and they're exciting. I'm in a pharma deal now. I'm in a digital marketing deal now. I got into an oil deal, like actual oil. Yeah. I'm not active. I'm a passive investor, but
yeah,
you know, diversifying, let's call it like that. But still, I love the industry, and that's the short answer. I know the people, and I like solving the problems. And I think Wichita needs a really robust meet me room, and you know, whatever. What else am I going to do?
All right. Well, hey, it's been great catching up, learning a lot more about you and your history, remembering where our paths kind of crossed at times. And, you know, it's been fun doing this, and glad you're still doing it. Glad you're still running hard and really focused on kind of how, here's a title for your book, Meet Me in the Meet Me Room. You're still working on those meet me rooms.
That's right, man. Thanks, Dan. It was great seeing you too. And I look forward to reading your book and giving you a great review. And I hope I see you at Metro Connect again. You know, just come and hang out.
I was going to come there this year, you know, because we're launching the book. I figured it'd be great, but you know, the people who are the organizers, you know, my team would reach out to them and they'd be like, well, you know, this one. I'm like, I'm not going to Metro Connect and, you know, being on kind of, I'm either going to go there and do it the right way or not go there at all. And I think maybe get the book out there. But you know, I have gotten, you know, invites, you know, for some of the other 4, you know, bandwidth related conferences coming up here, and some of the analysts want to do things. In fact, one's being scheduled as we speak with one of the major analysts in the industry who's going to bring me on as a guest and, you know, talk to me about what's going on with the book and whatnot. So, you know, I'll start popping my head in there again, but not as an operator. Those days are behind me.
You're chairman emeritus.
Yeah, and still a big investor in Zayo. So I'm glad to see this AI trend is playing well for Zayo.
It's going to be great for Zayo. AI is great. Steve's doing a great job. Mark, the whole team, everybody's good.
Good deal. Thank you, Hunter. This was great. See you soon. All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg with support from Courtney Caruso, Emily Reed, and Gibson Seeger.